Cyberpunk, The Flame That Remains. Written and read by Ethan Taplin. Chapter 11. Kintsugi. Night City 2075. Someone was bleeding again. The smell hit first. Iron, old copper, the bitter trace of ozone where someone's mod had discharged during the scuffle. The hallway hummed with that specific kind of silence you only got in the seconds after a fight. Lights flickered overhead. Somewhere behind the door of 3622, a panel was cracked and sparking like a failing nerve. The residents had stopped shouting. He stepped forward, boots heavy on the tile, eyes already scanning for damage as he approached. There was blood on the wall, more on the doorframe, a smeared handprint. A nod of his head pointed out the stains to the other man who followed close behind. They each held a pistol as they approached the door. On the other side of the half-closed door, low voices could be heard. Then, there was a sharp crash, a chair or a body slamming against a wall. With a single gesture, the two men burst into the apartment. Ares leveled his weapon at the chest of the first occupant. Dixon pointed his at the second. The third person they found inside was a young woman. She was bound and gagged and bleeding from a nasty head wound. Her attackers froze and raised their hands over their heads. One dropped a knife which clattered to the floor. Dixon ushered them into a corner as Ares knelt next to the girl. Upon closer inspection, her nasty-looking head wound was just that. It was superficial and already clotted. He pulled the gag from her mouth as she looked at him with wild, tearful eyes, then cut the cords that bound her. She pushed herself off the ground and covered her bare chest as she sobbed. So that's what the knife was for. Ares reached into a pocket and withdrew a small folded cloth. It unfurled into a small blanket that he wrapped around the girl's shoulders before standing to face Dixon and the thugs. He tapped the comm in his collar. "We've got 2 thugs in 3622. Send a medical drone up around the West Loop." An affirmative answer came back. At the same time, his agent lit up. The device buzzed in his pocket as it projected a message across his vision at the same time. Incoming call from Nornir. Sophie. He hadn't heard from her for 2 days. That wasn't exactly uncommon, but that she'd called instead of finding him on patrol worried him. Ares stepped back from the girl, turning to Dixon. "I've got to go." Dixon frowned, adjusting the grip on his pistol. "We've still got a mess to clean up." Ares didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to the 2 men huddled in the corner. Bloody knuckles, twitchy eyes, boots still tacky with the girl's blood. One of them shifted slightly, his hand drifting toward his pocket. Dixon noticed too. It happened fast. The jacketed man shoved his hand into the garment. The other lunged toward a broken bottle on the floor. 2 shots, cracked like thunder. Both of the thugs collapsed in a heap, twitching briefly before going still. Smoke curled from the barrels of the hound's weapons. Ares looked at Dixon without flinching. Mess cleaned. Dixon stared at the bodies of the would-be rapists, blood pooling around his boots. "I'll keep an eye on her until the drone gets here." He moved to the girl and helped her to her feet, then led her out into the hall. Ares followed them, tapping the comm in his collar again to report the bodies, then turned and started down the hall as he answered the call, still ringing in his head. "Sophie," he said softly, the world narrowing to the sound of her voice. "I need you to come to Navarro's clinic. Come quick, I need your... Shit!" Her voice was shaking, strained. Something was wrong. "Sophie?" Ares' voice dropped low. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "No." A pause, then faster, more urgent. "No, I'm fine. It's my sister." Sister? The word caught him off guard. She'd never mentioned her family, not once. He wanted to ask, but swallowed the impulse. "Be there soon," he said instead. Her reply was quiet. "Thanks." He broke into a sprint, charging down the hall toward the elevator that would take him right to the parking garage. His mind raced ahead of his body. Sister. The word didn't sit right. Not because it was strange. Hell, everything about Sophie's life had always seemed held tight behind locked doors. But because of the way she'd said it. Panicked and raw. Real. He nearly crashed into the back wall of the elevator when he pushed past another hound who was just stepping out. He slammed his hand into the control panel, ordering it to take him down. When the doors finally closed, he leaned against the wall to catch his breath. He only realized that neither he nor Sophie had ended the call when he heard her exhale. Her breath was shaky, like her lungs were full of something she hadn't yet figured out how to say. "She saved my life," Sophie finally murmured. "Now she might die because of it." Ares didn't answer right away. He put every thought out of his mind except one. "She won't." His voice was low and sure. The elevator doors opened into the parking garage. Ares strode quickly to his car and was on his way. He never ended the call, though Sophie said nothing else. When Ares stepped inside Elise Navarro's Ripperdoc clinic, he was greeted by the barrel of a gun. It was held by a strange woman as tall as he was, with a shock of wild red hair, green eyes, and a spattering of freckles across her cheeks. She stared him down as the door swung closed behind him. The barrel didn't waver. Ares raised his hands slowly, palms out. "Easy," he said, voice calm, steady. "Sophie called me." The woman didn't lower the gun. Her gaze flicked up and down his frame, measuring him like a threat and puzzle both. "You're Ares," she said finally. Not a question. "I am." The red-haired woman lowered the gun, tilting her head ever so slightly, as though listening to a voice that wasn't there. "You are the one who watches when she runs. The man with eyes like a gathering storm." She stepped back and gestured him further in. "You may pass, flame-touched." Ares didn't have time to be off-put by her strange speech pattern. He quickly stepped past her and into the darkened workshop. It was cluttered, cybernetics scattered across every surface. In the back, a light shone past a rack of hanging cybernetic limbs. Ares moved deeper into the clinic, boots clicking against the steel-grated floor. The workshop was dim, lit mostly by the cold glow of sparse desk lamps and the overhead light in the back. The shadows cast by the hanging limbs made the space feel more like a butcher's shop than a place of healing. He found them in the back, under the harsh white light. Navarro was hunched over a table where another young woman with red hair lay. Bits and pieces of an armored suit were scattered across the floor. The woman on the table was barely conscious, her face pale and soaked in sweat. Crimson smeared her face inside. Navarro's gloved hands moved with methodical speed, soaked in blood and antiseptic. Sophie stood nearby. She looked like a bomb that had already gone off. She wore a set of blue scrubs and a leather jacket that was too big for her. She was spattered in red and black. She was wringing her hands, and her brow was knit in an expression of worry. Her eyes were red, and her cheeks each bore a clean streak. She'd been crying. She turned when she heard Ares' steps. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her throat moved as if she were trying to swallow words that refused to go down. When she did speak, her voice was quiet. "You came." Ares nodded, crossing the room without hesitation. "You called." She nodded once. Her lips pressed into a thin line as though she was trying to hold back a flood. Grief, guilt, rage, all of it shimmered just beyond her eyes. She didn't step toward him, didn't say another word. Just stood there with her fingers twisted together, like she was waiting for him to flinch away from what she had become. He didn't. Instead, he closed the distance and wrapped her in his arms. He wasn't sure what else to do but be there, solid and steady and real. Sophie tensed for half a breath. Then something inside her gave way. She folded into his chest, her hands clutching at the front of his jacket, like he was the only thing anchoring her to the floor. "Liv. She almost died. I thought Freya had killed her," she whispered, voice cracking. "I thought she was dead." Ares didn't ask who Freya was. Not yet. He just held her tighter. "And then Eric found me." Her voice hitched. "He dragged me away from the fight. Tried to tear my mind apart. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I thought She choked. I thought that was the end. But Liv, she shot him. She killed him. She paused, sobbing into his chest. She saved me again. He gently stroked her hair, not sure what to say to comfort her. On the table, Liv stirred faintly. Navarro didn't pause her work. Her voice was calm and clinical. Vitals stabilizing, internal bleeding's under control. Sophie let out a breath like it had been trapped in her chest for hours. Ares felt it against his chest, her weight leaning into him just a little more. She seemed small and fragile now. He looked past Sophie to the girl on the table, then to the other redhead, still guarding the door. His jaw tightened. This family was unlike any he'd ever known. But whatever it was, whatever Sophie had just let him glimpse, it was real, and it was hers. He made a silent vow that he would protect it, just as he would protect her. He stroked a hand down her back. Tell me what you need. Take me home, she whispered. Please. The car coasted into the mega-building H5 parking garage. Strip lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows between rows of other vehicles. A neon green sign depicting the Wirehound's insignia pulsed faintly near the elevator. Ares eased the car into a spot near the lift and killed the engine. The silence left behind was heavy. Sophie had been explaining things as he drove, but Ares wasn't sure he fully understood. A secret military program that had used children, enhancing them with cyberware and turning them into killers. It made Arasaka and Militech look downright conscientious. And Sophie, his friend, his ally, at the heart of it all, not just involved, not just affected, but made by it. In retrospect, it almost seemed obvious. Nobody picked up net running like she had unless they'd been trained in a pressure cooker, and not just trained, but shaped for it. She didn't talk about her past. Not once. Nothing more than a vague mention of Norway when questioned about her accent. But he'd never pressed the issue. Everyone in Night City had their ghosts. He figured she'd left hers behind. He was only half right. What she'd left behind hadn't stayed buried. It had followed her, clawed its way back into her life with blades and blood and fire. Just 2 hours ago, Sophie had been fighting for her life, and he'd been patrolling like it was any other night. He and Dixon had taken down 2 thugs mid-assault. They'd saved that girl, got her out before things turned permanent. It had felt like something in the moment, a small victory. Now, that victory seemed to be nothing more than a paper crane before a wildfire. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. He didn't want to diminish the good he and Dixon had done. He knew the girl they'd saved would remember that moment for the rest of her life. But compared to what Sophie had just told him, it felt small, incomplete, like he was playing at being useful. He turned slightly, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. Ymir scanned attack. Niheimar, Muspelheim, Subject 13. The names stuck in his head like shards of glass. She hadn't moved since the engine cut. Just sat there, arms crossed tightly over her chest as if holding herself together by force. Her jaw was tight, her expression hard to read. But her eyes, they were still burning with purpose. It hit him then just how much she'd been carrying on her own, and how little of it she'd let anyone else see. He exhaled slow and measured, then gave a faint shake of his head and glanced over at her. The lights from the dashboard painted half his face in quiet amber. "You tell a hell of a story," he said with a soft smile. Her arms stayed crossed, eyes fixed somewhere ahead, but unfocused. "Still feels like I'm missing a few chapters," he added. She let out a breath, not quite a sigh of relief. "I told you the part that matters." "I figured." He pushed his door open, the hydraulic hiss breaking the quiet. And you had good reason not to tell me earlier. I won't ask that you tell me the rest until you're ready. Sophie followed him out of the car and across the garage. Their footsteps echoed quietly off the concrete walls. The garage around them was quiet, save for the buzzing of the lights and the distant hum of the city bleeding through the walls. What happened to Freya? Ares asked as he pushed the button to call the lift. I didn't see the rest of the fight, but before Eric got me, I managed to take part of her hand. It sounded like Astrid got her pretty good between the ribs a few times, ripped apart one of her legs, and managed to break most of her claws. Liv said that the first thing she saw when she managed to get back up was Freya retreating. Ares nodded slowly, absorbing that. Think she'll come back, cause more problems? Eventually. Sophie's voice was steady but not confident. Freya doesn't lose gracefully. But she won't rush into another fight with Astrid either. Not after that. The elevator arrived with a rumble and a soft ding as the doors slid open. Ares stepped aside to let her in first, but she hesitated as he asked, And Mael? After a moment, she entered the lift, saying, He wasn't part of the fight. Liv said he told her and Astrid that Eric had come to me in my cell. He's the reason they got me in time. Got a message to them before things got really bad. Ares frowned. But he didn't stay. He was just gone after that. Astrid looked for him while I was recovering, before we made our escape, but there was no trace. That sound like him? Sophie leaned against the back wall of the elevator, arms unfolding slightly as the doors slid shut. No, and it's really starting to bug me. Ares watched the floor numbers begin to tick upward. You think it's a bad sign? I don't know. I think he's deciding who he wants to be, she said. He's always been caught between us and our mother. I just don't know which part of the family he'll decide is more important to him. Ares gave a quiet nod. And if he decides he can't stay with them? Then he'll find me. She hesitated, then added, At least, I hope he will. The elevator chimed again, doors parting to reveal the familiar walkways of their floor. Neon signs flickered overhead, casting a strange rainbow over the concrete. A few wirehounds were gathered, lounging near the stairwell, nodding to them as they passed. Ares offered quick, familiar greetings. They entered the atrium and took the shortest path to Sophie's door. She pressed her hand to the control panel and the door slid open. Ares hadn't been in Sophie's apartment since the day he'd come to collect her rent, and ended up comforting her. That was over a year ago, and the apartment had drastically changed since. It was dark, the only lights coming from the half-shuttered window and an array of computers. 3 monitors were suspended above a square tub pushed against the wall below the window. A hose had been run from the tub to the shower to drain it. Cables snaked across the floor between the tub and the desk where the rest of Sophie's computer setup sat. Puddles of water were still scattered across the floor. Ares stepped into the room behind her, pausing for a moment to take in the scene as Sophie walked over to her desk. She lifted a towel off the back of her chair and draped it over the largest puddle. When most of the water had dried, she tossed the towel into the open laundry machine and turned back to her desk. The monitors above the desk lit up as she sat down and began tapping away at her keyboard. You've been through hell, Ares said quietly as she worked. And you're still standing. Sophie glanced at him with an eyebrow raised. Is that your way of saying I look like shit? He cracked a small smile. You're wearing a jacket a size too large, torn scrubs, no shoes, and you're covered in blood. But no, you don't look like shit. Sophie gave a soft snort and turned back to the screens. High praise. After a few moments of silence, she paused. Her hands rested on the keyboard a moment longer before she straightened and turned toward him, leaning back against the desk. What do you see when you look at me, then? It wasn't a challenge. There was no edge in her voice, just quiet curiosity, like she wasn't sure what she wanted the answer to be. Ares didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look he gave her carried all the words he could have said, but chose not to. He saw her, beneath the blood, beneath the implants, beneath the pieces that had been broken and rewired and sharpened into blades. He saw not what she had been made into, but the strength it took to remain herself in spite of it. Sophie held his gaze longer than she meant to. Then she looked down, a breath catching softly in her throat. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's enough looking." She looked back to the desk and powered the computer down, then turned and made her way to the bed. "Let's get what we came for," she said, digging her hands under the mattress and beginning to lift. Ares moved to her side without a word, bracing the other corner as she pushed the mattress up. The springs groaned in protest, revealing the hollow compartment hidden beneath. The storage space was the size of the entire bed, but held only a single object. It was a compact black case, smooth and matte, and covered in a thin layer of dust. She grabbed the case with a free hand and set it by her feet. Then they lowered the mattress back into its place. When she set the case on the bed, Ares saw that it was held shut with a thick padlock. Sophie didn't even bother with the lock. She tugged the monowire hidden in her left wrist free and used it to slice cleanly through the shackle. The wire slid back into its port with a hiss as she popped the lid of the case open to reveal a neatly folded bundle of black cloth. Ares watched as she carefully unfolded the bundle, the cloth whispering as it spread across the bed in even layers. Inside were the pieces of a net-running suit. Lightweight mesh and flex fiber interwoven with white armor plates. No corporate branding, no serial numbers, just sleek functionality. It wasn't flashy gear. The armor was minimal by design, covering only the vitals and the parts of the limbs most likely to catch a blade or block a blow. Beneath it all, the bodysuit shimmered faintly under the light, its weave impossibly fine, almost alive. He reached out to touch the fabric. "This is what you wore back then?" "Mm-hmm," Sophie murmured. "It was designed specifically for me." She flipped the suit over to look at the back. "I was 14 when we stole the tech from the Waldman Corporation in Zurich. I wore it every time we deployed following that mission." "And when you escaped," Ares deduced. "It was originally designed for space and pressure suits, but Mother evidently thought it would be put to better use as the base of a net-running apparatus. I can't say she wasn't right about that, but I've always wondered about all the good it would have done had we just left it in the hands of its creators." Ares was silent, contemplating her words. Sophie stepped away from the bed and took off her jacket. She tossed it onto the bed next to the bodysuit, and was about to lift her shirt when Ares realized what was happening. He turned quickly, giving her space. "You want me to wait outside?" "No." He heard the light rustle of fabric as she undressed behind him. There was no hesitation in her voice, just quiet certainty. Ares didn't move. He kept his eyes fixed on the wall on the far side of the bed. Hands relaxed at his sides. The blue scrubs joined her jacket on the bed. First the shirt, then the pants. The soft sounds behind him stilled, leaving only the quiet hum of the city beyond the window. Ares kept his eyes forward. The bodysuit still lay on the bed next to him, waiting. He could see the mesh fabric shimmering under the window's half-light. Then he felt her arms sliding around him from behind, slow and deliberate, bare and warm. Sophie's forehead came to rest gently between his shoulder blades. She didn't say anything at first, just breathed in like she needed the stillness, like she needed him. Ares froze, just for a moment. Not because he was uncomfortable, but because he didn't want to move too soon and shatter whatever fragile thing this was becoming. Thank you, she murmured, her voice low, close. For so long, I felt like something broken, like it didn't belong anywhere. I don't feel like that anymore. He let out a slow breath, still forming his words. He turned around. She loosened her grip as he moved, but the moment he faced her, she pulled him in tighter than before. Not in fear, not in weakness. In trust, a rare and deliberate gift. Ares wrapped his arms around her without hesitation, holding her with the same steadiness he always carried in the field. But this was different. There was no urgency, no danger to ward off. Just her. Even if you do break, he said softly, I'll help you pull the pieces back together. Sophie didn't respond. She just stayed there, her head tucked beneath his chin, her breathing slow and steady. Eventually, she pulled back, but not far. Her hand slid down his arms before letting go completely, fingertips trailing as if reluctant to leave. Her eyes met his, steady now, but still soft around the edges. Beautiful. She stood a head shorter than him, her slight frame caught in the muted glow from the window. She was lean, her body shaped for movement and endurance, not vanity. Her chest was subtle, her silhouette unassuming. Nothing exaggerated, nothing crafted for attention. She didn't posture, didn't try to impress. She simply stood there, bare and unguarded, letting him see her every truth. Ares thought she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Not for symmetry or softness, but because she was Sophie, because she trusted him with this, because she was real, and that was everything. She held his gaze a moment longer, then stepped past him without a word. Ares didn't move. He didn't speak. He just gave her the space, knowing that the moment didn't need to stretch any further to mean something. He heard the shift of cloth as she lifted the bodysuit from the bed, the whisper of the mesh slipping over her skin. A low chime sounded as the suit sealed against her, sinking to her internal systems. When she spoke again, her voice was composed and steady. I'm done. He turned. The ROM suit clung to her like it was her own skin. Light from the window cast a soft gradient across the armor plates, catching along the curves of her shoulders, the lines of her hips, the gentle rise and fall of her breath. The mesh between the plating flexed with her every movement, seamless, reactive, almost alive. It was armor, clearly, built for speed and survival. Every plate had a purpose, every seam aligned with intention. But the way it fit, contouring to every line of her body, left little to the imagination. Ares cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his own silence. Looks like it still fits. Sophie looked at him with a slight smirk on her face. She was amused, and as far from shy as she could get. Too well? She asked, turning in place with a deliberate flare, letting the suit catch the light. Ares blinked just once, and gave a small shake of his head, half amused, half aware of how carefully he had to tread the line between looking and staring. I mean, I'm not complaining, but unless you want to draw the eyes of everyone we pass on the way out of here, maybe wearing something over it wouldn't hurt. Sophie arched her brow, still wearing that faint smirk. Are you suggesting I cover up? I'm suggesting that you don't stop any hearts or start any riots on the way out. She tilted her head like she was entertaining the idea for a second, then shrugged. Fair enough. Her eyes drifted to the blue glass panel on the opposite side of the room. Her eyes flashed, and the panel slid open, revealing a small walk-in closet. All right then, you pick. Ares blinked again. What? You want me to put something on over it? She gestured to the closet. Knock yourself out. He hesitated. Sophie caught the look on his face and grinned. What's wrong? Afraid you'll pick something unflattering. I'm more worried I'll pick something that makes you laugh at me for the next 10 years. 10 years, huh? Think we're gonna make it that far? She asked, voice light, but with something genuine flickering beneath it. Ares gave her a pointed look, diminished slightly by the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Guess that depends on whether or not you laugh me into an early grave. Sophie giggled. No promises. You're enjoying this way too much. A little, she admitted, leaning on the wall outside the closet. Honestly, I'm just not sure what to choose. I've never worn layers with the suit before. That made him pause, the smile dropping from his lips. Seriously? She nodded. The suit reacts to my environment. The mesh was intended to be worked into spacesuits or diving gear, but once Mother Scientists got their hands on it, they fine-tuned it for all sorts of other environments. Heat, cold, dry, humid, you name it. The suit adjusts to the environment and regulates my bodily responses accordingly. Ares stepped into the closet, brow furrowing slightly. And they never gave you anything to wear over it. A scarf and a hat once, when we were at a Militech site in northern Alaska during the winter, she said with a faint shrug. But that was the exception. We didn't operate in public. No one was supposed to see us, let alone what we were wearing. He ran a hand over the edge of a hanging rack, eyes scanning the rows of folded garments and suspended outerwear. You know you're leaving fashion choices to a guy with exactly one jacket. Hey, you make it work, Sophie said, peeking around the doorframe with a teasing tilt to her head. Besides, you're the one who said not to start a riot. I figure that makes you the expert on public-facing armor etiquette. Ares huffed a soft breath through his nose, crouching to check a lower shelf. Armor etiquette. That a real thing now? You tell me, soldier boy. Ares smiled, shaking his head as he sifted through her clothes. Pretty sure it's not covered in any field manual I've ever read. He straightened up and looked back at the hanging rack, fingers trailing along the edge of a few garments before pausing on something dark, tucked slightly to the side. He pulled it free carefully. A charcoal gray yukata, unpatterned, its lines clean and minimal. The fabric was soft and unassuming. He pulled it from the rack and held it up for her to see. This one, he said. I think it'll hide the armor well, and should be loose enough that the plates won't snag and it won't impede your movement. Sophie took it from his hands with a quiet nod, her fingers brushing his. That was a gift from Mrs. Higashi down the hall. I didn't have the heart to turn her down. She unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the garment as if trying to picture herself in it. It's a little different from my usual look. Doesn't mean it's wrong for you. She turned away as she slipped the garment on. It wrapped easily around her, sleeves loose but not billowy, the hem falling just below her knees. She tied the sash at her waist, adjusting and cinching it down in a clean motion, then rolled her shoulders, testing the movement. Ares gave her a once-over, nodding and hoping she couldn't hear his heartbeat quicken. Nope, not your usual, but it suits you. She glanced down at herself, then gave him a smile. I'll take it. She stepped past him into the closet and began pulling clothes from a cardboard box tucked in the corner. Shirts, a few pairs of pants, and spare undergarments. She stacked them with care, building 2 piles. For Liv and Astrid? Ares asked. Will they fit? She nodded, not looking away from her task. All they've got is their armor at the moment. Liv's is busted, and apart from the jacket that I was wearing, would you grab it, please? They didn't bring any of their things from the Volsung campus. I picked these up at a thrift store a few months ago. I realized later that most of their sizes were mislabeled and never got around to taking it back. The stuff I've grabbed should fit them just fine. I hope. She started stuffing the clothes into a duffel bag as Ares retrieved the jacket, draping it over one arm. They left everything behind when they decided to help me. I owe them so much more than this. Her voice wavered. But it's a start. Ares didn't respond right away. He just watched her work. He set the jacket in the duffel before she zipped it closed. He lifted it onto his shoulder while she pulled on a pair of running shoes. She stood and stepped back into the large room that made up the rest of the apartment. The light spilling in from the window had brightened, casting an orange glow across the walls and the dormant tech still scattered around the room. Everything felt quieter now. It felt like it was finally, really, hers. Ares stood quietly at her side. Feels different, he said. Sophie nodded. It is. She scanned the space one last time, not to say goodbye, but to take stock. She'd be back. This was still her space, her territory. But right now, there were things that needed doing. At the door, Ares adjusted the weight of the duffel and glanced at her. So, what now? Sophie stared at the control panel for a moment, then turned to him. There was a fire in her eyes again, the kind that refused to flicker and die. I'm going to find a way to confront her, she said. Mother, Ursa. I don't know how exactly yet, but I will. She doesn't get to control our stories anymore. Ares met her gaze without blinking. Then whatever that looks like, however it plays out, I'm with you. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. No hesitation, no second guessing. She stepped closer, stopping just in front of him. Thank you, she said, voice low and steady, for everything. Then she reached up to his cheeks and pulled him down into a kiss. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't uncertain. It was deliberate, grounded in everything they'd shared, everything he'd seen of her, everything she trusted him to hold on to. When she finally pulled away, her hand lingered on his cheek. We've got work to do, she said. Ares smiled. I'm right behind you. She hit the door panel, and it slid open with a soft hiss. They stepped through together, the hall lights washing over them as the door sealed quietly behind.